Thanks, Jason. Okay, next up is me, just in case people have walked in. Since I'm James Fitzsimons, Director of Conservation and Nature Conservancy here in Australia, and this talk's on private protected areas, a subject dear to my heart in a lot of ways. So, private protected areas in Australia, the term is broadly used, but probably misused in a lot of ways as well. There's only one definition, and it's an obscure definition within Australia's strategy for the National Reserve System. Of course, first and foremost, it has to be a protected area under the IUCN definition. But within Australia, for a private protected area, it has a certain level of extra requirement. It must be reserved in perpetuity. Any change in management status must have ministerial or statutory approval. So this is quite a high bar, and perhaps a bit higher than some of the other definitions that are going to come in soon. We'll sort of hear in this conference launch of the private protected area report from IUCN, which has some different classifications, but at the moment in Australia, this is the classification. And there's basically two main types of private protected areas in Australia. One is conservation covenants, so legally binding agreements over time, and two is the land owned by land trusts. So, how many do we have? We've about 5,000 terrestrial private protected areas in Australia at present. And this is covering almost 9 million hectares, so quite a large expanse of the country. In terms of covenants, we've got about 10 programs operating in states and territories which we classify as a private protected area, covering almost 5,000 individual properties and about 4.5 million hectares. In terms of the land trusts, we've got 140 odd properties owned by major land trusts, and again that's covering almost 4.5 million hectares. Now it's important to note these are mutually exclusive figures. Some of the large land trusts have covenants over their properties and others don't. So as you can see from this graph, we've grown the estate quite dramatically in the last 15 years or so. So back in 2000, we had virtually no private land in the National Reserve System, in part based on the poor reporting going into it, but also there was a very low extent at that stage. And as you can see over time, that's increased quite dramatically. So it's still low in comparison to the public estate and Indigenous estate, but nonetheless it's grown quite significantly. And the growth in covenants has been quite similar. Now on this graph you'll see that covenants are quite a bit higher than what I quoted previously. There's a number of covenanting programs in Australia that wouldn't classify as a protected area based on a lower level of protection or a different admission by the soil protection rather than biodiversity. And this is a pretty terrible map, but it also highlights, I guess, our problem with data around this front at the moment. So this highlights where the conservation covenants are at the moment. This map was supplied by the federal government about 3 years ago. This was the only consolidated collection of data around covenants in this country. And so where are the covenants? They're basically southwest WA, southern South Australia, Victoria, Tassie, eastern New South Wales and eastern Queensland. To some extent it reflects, I guess, the tenure over time when this land has been mostly freehold and these where covenants have been mostly. So what's driven the growth? I guess it's a multiple of factors. It's increased interest from private landowners themselves in protecting their own properties, increasing environmental awareness and concern about this environment. There's been a lot more incentive payments in the last 15 years or so, which have encouraged private land to come on under the protection. The growth in revolving funds, whereby land trusts and covenanting agencies buy important areas of private land, on-sell that to sympathetic owners, put a conservation covenant on top. Certainly the role of the federal government's National Reserve System program has been fundamental to the growth of land trusts in Australia. The provision of 2/3 of the funding for acquisitions has been a real boom and has enabled private land trusts to dramatically increase the land they own and the size of land they own. And the increasing role of conservation philanthropy in Australia at the same time is quite important. So here are the major land trusts in the country. There's two national bodies that operate across the whole of the country, Heritage Australia and Australian Wildlife Conservancy, and a number of other state-based land trusts in each of the states and some regional ones. The Nature Conservancy is up there. We don't buy land ourselves in Australia, we help other organisations to do the job. So what's been protected? Is it strategic? Well, most of the purchases under the National Reserve System program are the only way you can get money through that program is to be filling a major gap in a bioregion or a highly endangered ecosystem. Revolving funds are a bit hit and miss. Some are targeted towards endangered ecosystems, others towards more aesthetic ecosystems, when allowed to be also. And the same for covenants. There's a mix there of targeting high priority ecosystems, but there's also the issue of landowners wanting to protect their own land, often which is the highest priority. So there's a real mix there. And some of this work done recently has highlighted that all the covenant agencies are moving towards the principles of comprehensiveness, adequacy and representativeness as well as the land trusts in particular have had a really fundamental role in growing, I guess, the conservation connectivity movement in Australia. So many of the large corridor networks that we see around the place have been instigated by the private land trust sector in buying a key block in the landscape, being involved there, and that interest spilling out onto surrounding land holdings. So what about security? Often the issue gets raised about how secure these sites are. In some recent research we've done, we found that only really 1.12% of the covenants have actually come off title. So very few have actually been released. And the breaches are nominally small, but we suspect this amount of data is pretty much unreported. So where to from here? I think we need to have some improved coordination around the private land conservation sector in Australia. At the moment it's very much a state-based arrangement. We are seeing improved coordination, formation of the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, which is great. But we need to take in, I guess, the broader range of land trusts covenanting agencies, both at a state and NGO. We need more support for covenant tours. At the moment, it's a fairly ad hoc mix of incentives or lack of incentives around the country. We need to get some consistency around that, rate relief and subsidies for works on properties. We need more support of the land trusts and bringing something back like the National Reserve System Funding Program is critical to do that. And we need continued research. Having been involved in this field for the last 15 years or so, I'm still staggered by how little research goes on around private property in Australia. Thanks very much.